Thank you for joining me for another Quick Hits conversation. I'm Dr. Robyn. With me today, I have Laura Dowling, Estelle Poiré, and James Blair. I want to ask the question, how do you respond when someone says, "You're not listening to me"? Laura, can you kick us off?
I immediately apologize and say, I am sorry, because I understand that we might think that we're listening, but we're only really listening about 50% of the time because we are driven by distractions in mass, cell phones, focusing on someone's outfit, focusing on how they have their hair done. So all these distractions make it very likely that I'm really not listening, which is paying close attention to and making sense out of what I'm hearing physiologically. So my first response is, I'm sorry, let's start again.
Okay. Estelle, what about you?
Well, I do have to share that it occurred to me in the past on more than one occasion that I was not listening and the person felt, hey, you're not listening to me. Some other times it occurred as well that I was actually listening. The person felt that I was not listening, but I was listening. However, this is a perfect question. Absolutely love it. Absolutely love it. I'd say that over time, I've been doing my best to leave my ego behind. And if I get that response, which occurred to me maybe a few months ago, it's to leave my ego behind. And it's just to, okay, I understand you feel that I'm not listening. I apologize. And make it a priority of shutting the hell up and just listen, fully listen. It will occur on some occasions that I'm fully present, fully listening, and other times I'm just not respectful and I'm not fully listening.
James, what would you like to add?
Actually, a little bit of both. I wholeheartedly agree with everything Laura and Estelle said. First thing to check, actually, was I listening? Because if I wasn't, it's time to apologize. And even if I was, an apology is a great place to start. I mean, for starters, I'm British, so I'll apologize if you knock me over. That's just how it is. But it's a really nice jumping off point because the other individual, like trying to get into their headspace a little bit, they're obviously feeling frustrated. They're stressed. Their cortisol levels will be really high. They're having difficulty verbalizing something and they feel that you're not getting it. So it doesn't even matter if you were listening. They're moments from a confrontation. In fact, depending on their tone and how they said it, the confrontation might have already started. So just de-escalate. So apologize, whether you were really listening or not, and then maybe circle back. Like if you're feeling a little bit cowardly, which you might be, I know I am sometimes, go back to something they said earlier and say, hey, do you know what? Actually, you're right. I was thinking about this thing you said earlier. Could you tell me a bit more about that? Or if you're feeling a little bit braver, empathize with the feeling. Like, do you know what? I'm really sorry. You're clearly feeling frustrated. I'm picking that up. Explain to me a bit more about what you mean and go from there. Like, as Estelle said, remove your ego from the equation and just try to prevent the argument before it starts.
Oh, that's interesting. So I think how I respond when someone says you're not listening to me depends upon what I think they actually mean. So I have had situations where someone has screamed at me, "You're not listening to me." And my response has been, I'm listening, I understand, I disagree. Because what they mean is you're not doing what I'm telling you to do. And that's when we say you're not listening to me to a toddler, that's what we mean. You're not doing what I'm telling you to do. And so when an adult says that, I don't think it's the correct answer to apologize. I think that's the time to stand up and say, I am a grown adult and I hear you, I am listening, but I disagree with you. What are your thoughts on that?
That's an interesting point there, Robyn, because, and I'm tying in what James said here, the heat of the conversation will drive whether I'm saying I'm sorry or I am listening to what you're saying. I'm just not agreeing with you. So there's certain people in my life who say to me, you're not listening to me. And I'm continually saying, I am listening, but I disagree. And others not so much, right? So it's this dance of, do you understand what somebody's really saying? And are you giving them the feedback that they expect? So if the feedback going back is not what they expect, which means not in agreement with them, usually it's a little bit of the abrasion there. So that's a very good point.
I really love it. I agree with Laura says. I love what you said, Robyn, because in a way, you're kind of putting a boundary saying, I disagree. You're just putting a boundary, and it doesn't necessarily need to end in a fight or anything. It's just you're clearly saying in a respectful way, in a calm way, I disagree. I'm listening.
You know what? I was just wondering, has anybody else here ever reacted really poorly to that question? Because I know that, particularly as a teenager, I was blessed with a really good memory and a really bad attitude. So if somebody would say to me, you weren't listening to me, I would sort of Ace Ventura style, taking a deep breath and go, you said A, B, C, and D. Before that, I said E, and then you said this, this, and this. I am listening.
Evidence.
Yeah, and it wouldn't go well.
As an adult with education and listening, I've now learned to say when someone says you're not listening, and I know I was, and I could do that because, oh yeah, I've been there, done that, James, you're right, doesn't work well. What I'll often try to say is something along the lines of, tell me what you feel like I haven't heard, and give them the opportunity to re-say what they feel like. Because you could summarize and you could prove and you could all this, but if you invite them, oh, tell me what you feel like I haven't heard. And sometimes they'll say exactly the same thing you already knew.
Or when you said, what did you really mean? Because there's the words that come out and there's the between the words. What's the intention? The tone and those other pieces. So I think I heard you say A, B, and C, but what did you really mean by that?
Or what do you think I misunderstood? Maybe is another. Yeah. Estelle, what about you?
In some occasions, the person who would say you're not listening, actually they were feeling very angry that day, and they were feeling stressed out. And for them, I was not listening because they were themselves feeling distracted. And then they were under the impression that I was not listening to them, even though I could have been listening actually to them. So I think it's very important to check with the person what they mean by, could you explain to me why you're saying that I'm not listening to you? And I think maybe it's a bit of a smoother approach. Actually, I'm gonna use that. So thank you. I really appreciate you guys.
Awesome. James, was that helpful?
Yeah, very. Particularly like those different approaches. I know back when I was teaching, I would find myself quite often having one-to-one conversations with teenagers that would be like, oh my God, you never listen. And I'm thinking, I definitely heard everything you said. But they're speaking from emotion, like the prefrontal part of their brain isn't engaged right now. They're responding with amygdala and limbic system. Everything is feeling rather than thought. So as Estelle was saying, they're speaking from a place of anger. As Laura was saying, it's the things in between the words that you need to be picking up on. So it might be, in that case, they were trying to tell me that they did everything they were asked to do in the class or whatever. But actually what they're really trying to communicate is a general frustration about something else that they perhaps weren't ready to verbalize. But if you're able to take those sorts of approaches and break down that distance between you, maybe then when their brain settles, they'll be ready to talk.
And if we take that and kind of turn it just a second, I try really hard never to say to someone, you're not listening to me. Instead, and I said it just this morning because I was standing at the top of the stairs. My husband was in the basement working out. The radio was on and I said something. And of course, he didn't hear me. So instead of saying, hey, are you listening to me? What I said was, hey, can you hear me? And he turned the radio down. And I feel like if you say, can you hear me? That's a different statement than you're not listening to me.
I was just going to say that conversation happens in my house several times a day. As somebody who got hit in the head a lot in his youth, for sporting reasons, not for anything else, I've got very damaged hearing, which is fine most of the time. But if there is a second sound, I can't distinguish between the two. So I very often turn around and find my partner stood in front of me saying, did you hear what I just said? And then I'm caught between going, yeah, or like, sorry, I totally missed it. But that approach to being asked, did you hear rather than are you listening, makes me feel a lot less threatened. And now hearing you say it makes me appreciate the way that she talks to me all the more.
That's so sweet. Well, and that is our 10 minutes. So I'm going to cut us off there. Thank you so much for listening to me about this conversation about listening. And I look forward to speaking to each of you again really soon.